All right, hello, 12s. Mr. K here. Our next topic is DNA. Excuse me. We've already covered a little bit of DNA when we talked about biomolecules, but now we're going to go and see how does DNA actually control everything and control the cell and all the other stuff that it does. Let's start by talking about what is the structure of DNA. So this will be a little bit of review because we already talked about the structure when we talked about biomolecules. So let's have a look at some DNA structure. So DNA, remember, is a big long strand. Do we have an image of a big long? There it is. DNA, big long DNA strand. It's a double helix. And so basically it's two backbones going one way and the other with that are linked across by these complementary base pairs. Now, so let's just talk about a little bit about this structure more in detail. So remember, DNA is made of nucleotides. That was we talked about that when we talked about nucleic acids. So each individual part or monomer of DNA or building block of DNA is a nucleotide. And there are 4 different kinds of DNA nucleotides. So what's a nucleotide made out of? It's got a phosphate group. It's got a pentose sugar. And that in DNA is going to be deoxyribose sugar. And then it has this base. It'll have a base. And so the phosphate groups and the pentose sugars, they make up the backbone, and they have these strong covalent bonds holding them together. So the backbone is really strong, and then the nitrogenous bases, they complementary pair. So what does complementary pairing mean? It just means that one kind of base can only pair to another kind of base. And there's 4 different bases, but they come in 2 groups. They come in these what are called there's pyrimidines and purines. Not important. They have some of them have 2 rings, some of them have 1 ring. The base pairs are adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. And so guanine can only pair to cytosine, and adenine can only pair to thymine. And you could see they make these 2 little hydrogen bonds. That's how they pair. And guanine to cytosine makes 3 hydrogen bonds. That's how they pair. So let's. So what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean, Mr. K? Well, it just means so there's. If you've got one backbone, you've got another backbone, phosphate and sugars, and then they come together, joining these complementary base pairs, and the DNA molecule wraps around itself. It forms a spiral, a ladder, and that has to do in this image here. It's all flattened out, but actually the bases are. Like the backbone is this way and the bases are across that way. The rings are flat, and the way they combine causes the molecule to have this double helix. So just remember those things. The backbone is strong. It's hard to break the bases away from each other, but the hydrogen bonds that hold the complementary base pairing together are weak. And so you can unravel the DNA molecule. You can open it up. And that's important, that you can open it up, because the functional part of the DNA molecule is that complementary base pairing. That's how the DNA molecule works, is that there's complementary base pairing. So that complementary base pairing, why it's important, and we'll learn about it in this whole unit, because we'll learn about protein synthesis, is that sequence of nucleotides. If it's adenine, if you look at this thing, you have adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, or guanine, cytosine, thymine, adenine. That sequence of nucleotides and their complementary base pairs is what determines the physical features of an organism. That determines that sequence of nucleotides is what determines the physical features of you. You have a unique sequence of nucleotides in all the DNA in your body. Obviously, there's a huge amount of similarity between somebody next to you, but there are slight differences in the sequence of nucleotides, tiny, less than 1%, that make you you, and make me me, and make somebody else somebody else. Now, so the way DNA, so there's millions of these nucleotides in your DNA, and your DNA isn't one long continuous strand. It isn't one huge continuous strand. It's broken up into very long strands, into what are called chromosomes. So into segments that are called chromosomes. So there's segments of DNA inside your nucleus. There are segments of DNA called chromosomes. And different organisms have different numbers of chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes. But what we actually have is 23 chromosomes. So this is where it gets tricky. So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, so 46 altogether. And why we say it that way is because of those 46, half of them, 23 of them, come from your mom. And the other half, the other 23, come from your dad. So you're a combination of the two. And so there are homologous, what are called homologous pairs of chromosomes. So there's 23 chromosomes. So chromosome 1 will have you'll have chromosome 1 from your mom and chromosome 1 from your dad. And they are slightly different because your mom is different than your dad. They would have different DNA in their chromosomes that'll be slightly different. And then each chromosome is divided up into what are called genes. So there are short segments of sequence of those nucleotides in your chromosomes that are called genes. So each chromosome is divided into genes. It's not broken, but it's still one. The chromosome is still one strand. But if you read all that DNA, it actually would be in segments called genes. And each gene codes for a protein. One gene equals one protein. And so chromosome 1 has a whole hundreds of thousands of genes that code each for proteins. The proteins can do anything. They can be enzymes, they can be structural proteins, all that stuff. And you've got one from your mom and one from your dad. And the advantage of that, of having these homologous pairs is that if, say there's a mutation. So there's an enzyme, there's a gene on your chromosome, a short segment, that codes for an enzyme, well, let's just go like a digestive enzyme. So an enzyme that digests starch. Let's just say that. So remember how enzymes work. Their three-dimensional shape is really important to the job that they do, that active site. And their three-dimensional shape is determined by the sequence of amino acids and the properties of those amino acids. And that sequence of amino acids is determined by the sequence of nucleotides in the gene for that protein. So if you have a mutation where the sequence of nucleotides, there's something wrong, and is something different, and now then the sequence of amino acids in the enzyme will be wrong, and the active site will be different, or the active site won't work well. Well, you still have a complementary chromosome, and so a complementary gene from, if there's a mistake from your mom, you still have one from your dad that can take over the role that you had from your mom. You were using the one from your mom, you will still be able to code that enzyme, that digestive enzyme that breaks down starch or proteins or whatever it is. So you have two copies, you have backups of every single one. And now those copies will be slightly different. The sequence of amino acids will be slightly different, and they still could work. They could work better, they could work less. And so when a gene has a copy of it on the other chromosome, and the copy is slightly different, that is called an allele. So there are alleles, complementary alleles. So for example, eye color is actually a whole bunch of genes, but let's just, for an example here, while we're talking, let's just say that eye color is coded by a single gene, a protein that codes the color of your iris, that it appears in, codes the color of your iris. So you can have different alleles for the color of your eye, because you can have an allele that is blue eye color, an allele that is green eye color, an allele that is brown color. And some of them will be more dominant than others. So if you have two complementary chromosomes, one from your mom, one from your dad, and one of them has the gene for the allele for brown eyes, the other one has the gene, the allele for blue eyes, brown eyes is dominant. So even though you might make the same protein, you might make both of them, you'll code them, so you're making the one for blue eyes and you're making the one for brown eyes, the organ of your you will appear to have brown eyes. I have brown eyes. So I will always have brown eyes. If you ever have the gene for brown eyes, you will have brown eyes. But I actually know, and that is called a phenotype. So a phenotype is what you look like, what trait you express. So I have, so if a person has, I know that I do, but I'll explain in a second why I know that I do. So you've got those complementary genes, one from your mom, one from your dad. And if the one from your mom is coding for brown eyes, the one from your dad is coding for blue eyes, you will express the brown-eyed one. So you have the genotype for brown eye and you have the genotype for blue eye, but your phenotype, what is expressed, is brown eye. There's all these terms we have to know. This helps us communicate when we're talking about genes. And it's a lot of words and it's a little confusing. Go along with the notes, you'll see. Let's just look here, the complementary, here we go, complementary basis. So this is a human, so here we go. Look, we got 23 chromosomes, but 46 altogether because there are 23 pairs. And that's what the chromosomes look like, if you wanted to know what chromosomes look like. The only weird one is the sex chromosome. So the 23rd chromosome, if you are a boy, you have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. And these two are different. So what happens is boys are actually more prone to genetic abnormalities if they have something to do with the X chromosome. So there's a whole bunch of genes that code on here. If something goes wrong with the genes that code on here, in boys, because the Y chromosome is different, they don't have a backup. So for example, color blindness is a lot more prevalent in men because the genes that code for the receptors in your eye for color are on this X chromosome. They're sex-linked. Women are double X. They have the same X chromosome. They don't have a Y chromosome. And so if women are less likely to get color blindness because if something goes wrong on this X chromosome, they have another X chromosome to take over the function. The genes on there will work. Different animals have different numbers of chromosomes. Look, fruit flies only have 4 chromosomes. Polar bears, 74. Cool. Okay. And these alleles, these different, these variations of genes are beneficial. It's how we evolve because certain alleles can be beneficial, and therefore, like let's say you have beetles, and the color of their shell. There's an allele that codes for brown, and there's an allele that codes for green. And if they live on leaves, the green allele is the more beneficial one because they're more camouflaged in the area that they live, where the leaves are green. And so predators will eat more of the brown beetles, and the green will become the dominant type of the dominant type of beetle. But it's still good so that would be the phenotype will be green, but it'd be still good for some of the beetles to carry the gene on those homologous pairs, to have the green one, but also have the brown one somewhere, to carry the brown one, just in case all of a sudden something happens in the environment and the leaves change. The leaves are now brown most of the time instead of being green for some reason. So the more variation of these alleles that a population can have, there doesn't have to be only two. Many members can have different colors. There could be red beetles, orange beetles. The more variety, the more alleles a population carries, the better. That's why Noah's Ark wouldn't work, because all the animals were just reduced to 2 animals. That's a very small gene pool. And what would also happen is, the other problem with having such a limited population is, if there are any abnormalities, they will be really likely to be passed on to the offspring. And usually mutations and abnormalities are recessive. So say you have the 2 complementary chromosomes, and one from the mother, one from the father, and the one from the father has has an abnormality on it. Some gene doesn't work, but the one from the mother will carry the complementary gene, the allele that does work, and so the animal is able to function. But now, if your population's really low, what happens is that offspring, the brothers and sisters of that offspring, will also have the bad gene from the father and the good gene from the mother. And their sex cells of all those offspring, some of them will only have the bad gene and some of them will only have the good gene. Your sex cells, sperm and eggs, only get half of your DNA, and it's randomly assorted which half you get. So you might get some sperm might contain the bad, the mutated one, and some sperm might contain the good one. So if you inbreed, and in a small population, there's going to be inbreeding, because now this bad gene is in so much of the sex cells, and if the brothers and sisters are mating, there's a very big likelihood that they will mate, and a bad gene, bad chromosome, will form an offspring with another bad chromosome. And now there is no good one in those offspring. And so those offsprings will have a malfunctioning protein or malfunctioning enzyme. A much larger percentage of them will, because of inbreeding. So that's why mating with your brothers or sisters is gross, and it's against the law, because you have much more likelihood of passing on those abnormalities. Okay, so we talked about genotype, we talked about phenotype, we talked about homologous pairs. Now, how do I know that I have the genotype for blue eyes, but I have the phenotype for brown eyes? Well, I have kids, and my wife has blue eyes. The genotype for blue eyes is recessive, so my wife must carry on both sets, from her mom and from her dad, on both of her chromosomes. She must carry the genes for blue eyes on both sets. So her sex cells, my wife's eggs, are guaranteed to have the genotype for blue eyes. I have brown eyes, but my brown eyes, they could be that I have the genotype for brown and for blue. I don't know. Or I could have brown and brown. It's possible to have brown and brown. I would have the same phenotype no matter what. I would have brown eyes. But our first daughter has blue eyes. So therefore, it must be that I carry the genotype for brown eyes and the genotype for blue eyes. And some of my sperm got brown eye genes, and some of my sperm got blue eye genes. And when we made our first daughter, my wife's blue came together with my blue, and she got blue eyes. Our second daughter got my brown eyes, and so she has brown eyes. So that's how I know that I carry both sets. But my genotype is brown-blue, but my phenotype is brown. And, okay. What else do we need to talk about? That's it. That is all we are covering in this first bit. So Things to remember: complementary base. So we've got the two backbones, covalent bonds holding the backbones together. Complementary base pairing. The two backbones are held together by only adenine can merge with thymine, guanine to cytosine. They're held together by hydrogen bonds that can be opened up. That sequence of base pairs is what determines the sequence of amino acids in proteins. DNA is organized within the nucleus into chromosomes. These are segments, long segments of DNA, and then those segments on them contain genes. Lots and lots of genes. Those are short bits of DNA that code for a protein. They're not that short. Some of them are hundreds of nucleotides long, but they're a lot shorter than a chromosome. If this was a book, if your nucleus, all the genetic material in your nucleus was a book, the chromosomes are chapters and the genes are sentences. And the nucleotides, the bases, are the letters. And we'll talk about shortly what the words are. And then you get a set. You have 23 chromosomes, but you actually have 46 because you have 23 pairs of chromosomes. One half from your dad, one half from your mom. Genotype is what your genes code for. Phenotype is what is expressed, what you look like. So you code for blonde hair and red hair, but you express red hair. Your phenotype is red hair. I don't know if hair works that way. And then what else do I need to just quickly sum up? Alleles are genes, so they're genes with variations. So there can be a brown hair allele, a blonde hair allele. All enzymes, all proteins have alleles. They have different, and a gene pool is all the different alleles in a population of individuals. So the 7 billion humans on Earth is a huge gene pool. There's lots and lots of variation, lots of different alleles. So we are really good at there's a huge variety in human beings. And which is really good for fighting disease, because your immune system, the way your immune system works, is genetic. It's partly genetic because the antibodies that you carry against disease, those are coded by DNA. So if we have a huge variety of antibodies, it's really hard to kill every single human on Earth with a virus or with a disease, because some of them, our gene pool is so wide we can resist. There's lots of variation in resisting disease. And we've seen that with coronavirus. Some people die from coronavirus, and some people, they get a minor cold. That's because of the variation in gene. That's because of our gene pool. They have different alleles that code for different components of their immune system. Okay, I leave you with that. Next, we're going to talk about DNA replication.